The blizzard had been going for 17 days straight. Leonard Hayes pushed through the snow that reached up to his knees. His breath turned into white clouds in the freezing air of Epsilon 7. This mining colony had been empty for 3 weeks now. Everyone left when the big machines that kept the place warm stopped working. The last ship took everyone away. Everyone except Leonard. He did not stay because he was brave or stupid. He stayed because someone needed to save the equipment, and Leonard Hayes was the best mechanic in 3 sectors of space. More than that, he stayed because the company paid him enough money to retire on a warm beach somewhere far away from frozen planets like this one. The ice caves under Reactor 3 should have been empty, just another place to take parts from before the planet moved into the dark side of its sun forever. But when Leonard went down into the crystal tunnels, his heat scanner found something impossible. 2 heat readings. Very weak, barely showing up, but alive. He found them in a room made of blue ice, frozen together in an embrace. They looked like dragons from old Earth stories, but smaller, about as big as horses. Their scales shimmered even through the ice. One dragon had scales that shifted between deep red and gold. The other had scales that shifted between purple and silver. Their wings were folded around each other like they were protecting one another. Their eyes were closed like they were sleeping peacefully. Leonard's scanner showed their body temperatures were just above freezing. Barely alive, frozen in some kind of deep sleep that his equipment could not fully understand. He should have left them there. His job was to save equipment, not rescue strange creatures. But Leonard Hayes had spent 15 years fixing broken things, and these creatures were just another problem to solve. Besides, leaving thinking beings to freeze did not feel right to him, no matter what kind of creatures they were. Over the next 4 days, Leonard worked carefully and slowly. He could not just warm them up quickly or their cells would break from the sudden temperature change. Instead, he built a heating system using parts from the reactor. It raised the temperature by half a degree every hour. He set up machines to watch their vital signs. He even made a medical room in one of the mining buildings, keeping it warm against the brutal cold outside. The red dragon woke up first, on the 6th day. Its eyes opened slowly, showing bright amber eyes that looked at Leonard with clear intelligence. He stayed back, keeping his hands where the dragon could see them, moving slowly. The dragon watched him for a long moment, then made a sound like wind chimes mixed with distant thunder. It was not threatening. It sounded almost like thank you. The purple dragon woke up an hour later and immediately moved to its companion's side. They touched heads gently and Leonard saw something pass between them, some silent way of talking. Then they both turned to look at him. Leonard raised one hand in what he hoped was a sign of peace. He spoke slowly, not thinking they would understand but needing to say something. "My name is Leonard Hayes. You were frozen. I warmed you up. The planet is dying. We need to leave soon." The red dragon tilted its head, studying him closely. Then it did something unexpected. It lowered its head, showing the soft scales of its throat while still looking at him. A sign of trust, of respect. The purple dragon walked up to Leonard directly, moving with surprising grace despite being obviously weak. It reached out with one clawed foot and gently touched Leonard's chest right over his heart. The touch sent a warm feeling through his body and suddenly he felt something. Not words exactly, but feelings. Thank you. Recognition. A promise. When the rescue ship finally arrived 2 weeks later, Leonard was not alone. The dragons had recovered enough to move on their own. And while the ship captain was shocked at first, Leonard's good name and the emergency situation helped smooth things over. The dragons were written down as recovered alien specimens, and the captain was promised a big bonus to keep quiet. About the unusual passengers, Leonard never learned how the dragons came to be frozen on Epsilon 7, or what they were doing so far from any known space. But as the ship lifted off and he watched the frozen planet get smaller in the darkness, the red dragon pressed its head against his shoulder, and the purple dragon wrapped its tail around his leg protectively. He had saved them. What he did not know yet was that one day, they would return the favor 1,000 times over. The journey back to civilization took 3 weeks. During that time, Leonard learned more about his new companions. They were smart, much smarter than any animal he had ever known. They seemed to understand his words, even if they could not speak them back. They watched everything he did with careful attention, learning about the ship, about humans, about this strange new world they found themselves in. The red dragon was bold and curious. It explored every corner of the cargo hold where they stayed, testing surfaces with its claws, sniffing at equipment, trying to understand how everything worked. Leonard found himself explaining things to it, pointing out controls and systems, even though he was not sure how much it understood. The purple dragon was quieter, more thoughtful. It spent long hours just watching Leonard work, its eyes following his hands as he maintained the ship's systems. Sometimes it would make soft sounds, almost like it was asking questions, and Leonard would answer, describing what he was doing and why. On the 8th day of the journey, something remarkable happened. Leonard was working on a stuck valve in the environmental system. He had been struggling with it for an hour, trying different tools and approaches. The red dragon watched for a while, then made a low rumbling sound and pointed with one claw at a specific panel. Leonard looked where it indicated and found a secondary release he had missed. The valve opened easily after that. From that moment on, Leonard started to see them differently. These were not just animals he had rescued. They were people in their own way. Different from humans, yes, but thinking, feeling, intelligent beings who deserved respect and kindness. The ship captain, a woman named Patricia Cole, came down to the cargo hold on day 12. She had been avoiding the dragons, uncomfortable with having such unusual cargo, but curiosity finally won out. She stood in the doorway, watching Leonard sit between the two dragons, all three of them looking at a star chart he had spread out on the floor. "What are you doing?" she asked. Leonard looked up with a smile. "Teaching them about where we are in the galaxy. I think they are trying to show me where they come from." The purple dragon had been touching different points on the map, and Leonard was marking them, trying to find a pattern. Patricia watched for a few minutes, then shook her head. "You know people are going to want to study them. Put them in labs. Figure out how they work." Leonard's face went hard. "They are not things to be studied. They are people who were in trouble, and I helped them. That is all." The captain was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know I have to report them when we dock." Leonard nodded. "I know. But you are going to report that I found 2 intelligent alien beings who chose to stay with me. Not that I captured specimens. There is a difference." Patricia looked at the dragons, really looked at them, and saw how they pressed close to Leonard, protective and trusting at the same time. She saw intelligence in their eyes and something else. Choice. They had chosen to stay with this strange human who had saved them from the ice. "All right," she said finally. "I will write it up your way. But you better have a plan for what comes next." Leonard had been thinking about that. He had money saved up, enough to buy a small place somewhere quiet. Somewhere he and the dragons could figure out their next steps without interference. Somewhere they could just be, without anyone trying to turn them into experiments or weapons or tourist attractions. When the ship finally docked at Gateway Station, Leonard Hayes walked down the ramp with 2 dragons at his sides. People stopped and stared. Security was called. Officials demanded explanations. But Leonard had all his paperwork in order, and he had rescued them in international space, which gave him certain rights under salvage law. It took 3 days of meetings and negotiations, but in the end, Leonard was allowed to keep his unusual companions. The dragons were registered as sentient beings under his guardianship, with the understanding that if they ever chose to leave, they were free to do so. As Leonard left the station with the dragons, heading for a transport that would take them to their new home, he felt the purple dragon's tail wrap around his wrist gently. The red dragon walked on his other side, its wing occasionally brushing his shoulder. They were together now, the 3 of them, a family born from ice and kindness, heading into an uncertain future, but whatever came next, they would face it together. 12 years passed like a gentle dream. Leonard Hayes retired to a small colony on Verdant Prime, a world of rolling green hills and clear blue skies. He used his savings to buy a nice home on the edge of civilization, where he could work on personal projects without company rules and sleep without the noise of industrial machines. The dragons stayed with him. In the years after their rescue, Leonard learned that they were brother and sister, part of a species called the Draconis. They were rare, ancient, and had abilities that most space-traveling civilizations had thought were just legends. They could travel through hyperspace without ships, survive in the empty space between stars, and most remarkably, they could bond with other thinking beings on a level that went beyond language. The Red Dragon, whom Leonard came to call Ruby for the way her scales caught the light, grew to the size of a small house over the years. Her personality was bold, protective, and fiercely loyal. She took it upon herself to guard the home, and local wildlife quickly learned to stay away from the property after a few encounters with a territorial dragon. The purple dragon, whom he named Midnight for her love of flying at night, was more thoughtful. She spent hours watching the stars, and sometimes Leonard would sit with her, both of them silent, sharing a friendship that needed no words. Midnight had a gift for sensing emotions, and on the rare times when Leonard felt the weight of loneliness or regret, she would curl around him like a living blanket until the feelings passed. They learned to talk to each other through a mixture of sounds, hand signals, and that special emotional connection that came from their bond. Leonard taught them about human culture, technology, and history. In return, they showed him glimpses of their own heritage, a civilization that had spread across galaxies long before humanity took its first steps into space. Life was peaceful. Leonard kept his workshop, taking occasional repair jobs for neighbors. Ruby hunted in the forests and brought back food. Midnight tended a small garden, her claws surprisingly gentle when working with plants. They were a strange family, but they were happy. The colony grew slowly around them. New settlers arrived, seeking the simple life that Verdant Prime offered. Leonard became known as the unusual mechanic who lived with dragons, and while some were scared at first, most came to accept the strange household. Children especially loved the dragons, and Ruby would sometimes give careful flights to the braver youngsters, much to their parents' mixed reactions of fear and delight. One particular memory stood out from those peaceful years. A young girl named Sophie, maybe 7 years old, had gotten lost in the forest during a camping trip with her family. The search party had been looking for her for 6 hours when Leonard heard about it. Without being asked, Ruby took to the sky, her keen eyes scanning the dense tree cover below. She found Sophie within 20 minutes, huddled under a fallen tree, scared and cold, but unhurt. Ruby landed gently nearby and made soft sounds until the girl looked up. Instead of being frightened, Sophie's face lit up with wonder. She had heard stories about the friendly dragons who lived with the mechanic. Ruby carefully picked up the girl in her claws, holding her as gently as a mother bird with an egg, and flew her back to the search party. Sophie's parents cried with relief and gratitude. From that day on, the dragons were not just tolerated in the community. They were loved. But peace, Leonard had learned in his long life, was always temporary. The galaxy was too large, too chaotic, too full of competing interests for any corner to remain untouched forever. And when trouble finally came to Verdant Prime, it came not with warnings or diplomacy, but with fire from the sky. Leonard was in his workshop when the first explosion shook the ground. Through the window he saw 3 warships dropping through the atmosphere, their hulls painted with the sign of the Kraith Dominion. The Kraith were a military species known for aggressive expansion and little respect for established colony rights. They saw a relatively undefended farming world and recognized an easy target. Ruby and Midnight appeared at his sides instantly, their eyes fixed on the descending ships. Leonard felt their anger through the bond, but also their calculation. They knew these ships. They knew what they could do. The colony's defensive system was minimal, designed to stop pirates and dangerous animals, not military-grade assault ships. The first attack from the Kraith ships destroyed the central communications building. The second destroyed the landing field. They were weakening targets before ground troops moved in. Leonard grabbed his emergency kit, his mind already racing through options. The colony had evacuation plans, but with the landing field gone and communications down, organizing a retreat would be nearly impossible. They needed time, but time was the one thing they did not have. Then Ruby made a sound, low and deep, that Leonard had never heard before. It was a sound of decision, of commitment. Midnight answered with a matching tone, and suddenly Leonard understood. They were going to fight. Not just to defend the home, but to defend the entire colony, and they wanted Leonard to trust them. Before he could object, both dragons launched skyward with a force that cracked the ground beneath them. They split apart, Ruby heading for the nearest warship while Midnight flew toward the second. Leonard watched through his workshop's strong windows, his heart pounding as the dragons became streaks of living color against the darkening sky. The Kraith had not expected resistance. Certainly not from anything like this. Ruby hit the first warship like a missile, her claws tearing through hull metal that was designed to withstand ship-to-ship combat. Alarms rang across the Kraith command networks as impossible readings flooded their sensors. A biological creature in space attacking a military vessel. It made no sense. Midnight was more precise. She passed through the hull of the second ship, an ability Leonard had not known she possessed, and began destroying critical systems from within. Engine control, weapons, life support. She moved through the ship like a ghost, and the Kraith soldiers could do nothing but watch their vessel die around them. The third warship, seeing its companions disabled in less than 3 minutes, tried to retreat. Ruby was faster. She caught it before it reached escape speed, and with Midnight's help, they forced it down in a controlled crash landing far from the colony's civilian center. When the dust settled, 3 Kraith warships lay broken across the landscape of Verdant Prime, and 2 dragons landed gently in front of Leonard's workshop, their scales gleaming in the firelight from the burning wreckage. They were unharmed, barely tired, and looking at Leonard with expressions that clearly said they had been holding back for years. Leonard walked out to meet them, his legs unsteady. He placed a hand on each of their heads, feeling the warmth beneath their scales, the steady rhythm of their breathing. They had protected him, protected all of them, just as he had once protected them. The colonists emerged from their shelter slowly, looking up at the sky, now clear of immediate threat. Children pointed at the dragons with awe. Adults whispered among themselves. Everyone had known Ruby and Midnight were special, but this was something else entirely. Sophie, the girl Ruby had once rescued from the forest, now a teenager, ran up to the dragons without fear. She threw her arms around Ruby's neck. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us again." Ruby made a gentle rumbling sound and lowered her head to nuzzle the girl softly. Midnight wrapped her tail around Leonard's waist, pulling him close. They were family. They protected family. It was that simple, but Leonard knew this was just the beginning. The Kraith would report what happened here. Other powers would hear about it. The quiet life he had built with Ruby and Midnight was over. The galaxy was about to take notice, and not all of that attention would be friendly. He looked at the burning wreckage of the warships, then at the dragons standing beside him, then at the colonists slowly emerging from their hiding places. They had won this battle, but he had a feeling that bigger challenges were coming. That night, as Leonard sat on his porch with Ruby and Midnight resting nearby, he watched the stars and thought about the future. He had spent his whole life fixing broken things, solving problems with his hands and his mind, but this was a different kind of problem. This was not about machines or systems. This was about survival. Ruby lifted her head and looked at him, her amber eyes reflecting the starlight. He felt her question through their bond. "Are you afraid?" Leonard considered it honestly. "Yes," he admitted. "But I am not alone. We will face whatever comes together." Midnight made a sound like wind chimes, her way of agreeing. The 3 of them sat in comfortable silence watching the night sky, each lost in their own thoughts about what tomorrow might bring. The quiet years were over. The galaxy was about to remember what dragons could do, and what humans would sacrifice to protect those they loved. But for tonight they had peace. For tonight they had each other. And for tonight that was enough. News traveled fast in the galactic community, but truth traveled faster. The Kraith Dominion first tried to hide reports of what happened at Verdant Prime, admitting that a farming colony had stopped a full military assault using only 2 biological creatures was not the kind of story that inspired confidence in their expansion efforts. But the surviving Kraith soldiers talked. They always did. And their stories, wild as they seemed, were backed by sensor logs, damaged warships, and the undeniable fact that an entire invasion force had been stopped in under 10 minutes. The name Leonard Hayes began appearing in intelligence reports across a dozen civilizations. Not as a threat exactly, but as a variable. An unknown factor? The human who lived with dragons. The mechanic who had somehow earned the loyalty of creatures that most species considered mythological. Representatives from the Galactic Council arrived within a month. Diplomatic envoys carrying messages of cautious curiosity and barely hidden concern. They wanted to understand the nature of Leonard's bond with Ruby and Midnight. They wanted promises that this was not the beginning of a new human military development. They wanted, quite simply, to know if they needed to be afraid. Leonard met them in his workshop wearing grease-stained work clothes and drinking coffee from a chipped mug. Ruby lounged on the roof above them, her eyes tracking every movement of the visiting officials. Midnight sat beside Leonard's chair, her tail wrapped protectively around his leg. The lead envoy, a stiff diplomat named Corvin from the Cerelian species, began with the usual polite words before cutting to the matter at hand. Mr. Hayes, the Council wishes to understand the nature of your relationship with these creatures. The Draconi species has been considered extinct for over 3,000 years. Their sudden reappearance, specifically allied with a human, raises questions. Leonard took a sip of his coffee before responding. I found them frozen. I warmed them up. They decided to stick around. That is the whole story. Surely it is more complex than that, Corvin pressed. The Draconis were known to bond only with beings of exceptional character. What makes you worthy of such loyalty? Leonard set down his mug and leaned back, considering the question seriously for the first time. I fix broken things. That is what I do. They were broken and I fixed them. I did not ask for loyalty or payment or recognition. I just did not want them to die alone in the ice. Maybe that is what they saw in me. Maybe that is enough. The envoy shifted uncomfortably, clearly not satisfied with the simple answer, but before he could press further, Midnight rose and approached Corvin directly. The diplomat froze, his species' natural fear response kicking in as the massive dragon lowered her head to his eye level. Then Midnight did something remarkable. She opened her mind to Corvin just for a moment, letting him feel what she felt when she looked at Leonard. Not worship or slavery, but genuine love. Respect. The comfort of knowing someone would risk their own safety to help a stranger. The warmth of found family. Corvin staggered back, his eyes wide. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer. More human, if that word could apply to a Cerelian. I understand now. The Council will be informed that you pose no threat. But Mr. Hayes, I must warn you. There are forces in the galaxy that will see what you have as a weapon to be acquired, or a threat to be eliminated. The Kraith were only the beginning. Leonard nodded slowly. He had been a mechanic long enough to know that fixing one problem often revealed 10 more waiting beneath the surface. Then I guess we will deal with them as they come. I did not ask for this, but I am not going to abandon Ruby and Midnight just because the galaxy finds us inconvenient. The envoys left shortly after, and Leonard watched their shuttle disappear into the sky. Ruby descended from the roof and pressed her head against his chest, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. Midnight curled around both of them, creating a protective circle. In the weeks that followed, the peace of Verdant Prime was restored, but Leonard noticed changes. More travelers passing through. More ships in orbit. More eyes watching. The galaxy had taken notice, and now they were all waiting to see what would happen next. Strange visitors started appearing at odd hours. Some claimed to be researchers wanting to study the dragons. Others were reporters hoping for an exclusive story. A few were clearly military scouts, though they tried to hide it. Leonard turned them all away politely but firmly. Ruby and Midnight were not specimens. They were not stories. They were family. One visitor was different. An old woman arrived at his door one evening, carrying nothing but a walking stick and wearing simple traveling clothes. Her eyes were bright with intelligence and something else. Recognition. She looked at the dragons and smiled like she was seeing old friends. My name is Helen, she said simply. I knew the Draconis long ago before they disappeared. I have been searching for them for 50 years. Leonard invited her in, curious and cautious in equal measure. Helen spent 3 days with them, and in that time she taught Leonard more about Ruby and Midnight than he had learned in 12 years. She explained their history, their culture, their abilities. She told him that the Draconis had once been guardians of peace across multiple galaxies, bonding with worthy individuals to help maintain balance and protect the innocent. But they had been hunted, she explained. Other species feared their power. Wars were fought. The Draconis numbers dwindled until they simply vanished, assumed extinct. Ruby and Midnight might be among the last of their kind. Leonard felt the weight of that knowledge settle on his shoulders. He looked at Ruby and Midnight with new eyes, understanding now just how precious they were, how much of a responsibility he carried. Helen saw his expression and placed a wrinkled hand on his arm. Do not think of it as a burden, she said gently. Think of it as an honor. They chose you. That means something. Before Helen left, she gave Leonard a small device. "It looks like an old communicator," she explained. "But it is more than that. If you ever need help, if you ever face something you cannot handle alone, activate this. There are others like me, scattered across the galaxy. People who remember the Draconis. People who will help." Leonard tucked the device into his pocket, hoping he would never need it, but grateful to have it. Helen hugged Ruby and Midnight goodbye, whispering something to each of them in a language Leonard did not recognize. Then she left as quietly as she had arrived, disappearing into the evening like a dream. Life continued, but with a new awareness. Leonard went back to his workshop, back to fixing broken things, but he kept his tools organized and his emergency kit packed. Ruby and Midnight began training in earnest, pushing their abilities further than they had in years. They flew higher, faster, longer. They practiced combat moves against each other, their movements becoming more coordinated, more deadly. They were preparing for war, even if Leonard hoped it would never come. The Colony Council called a meeting to discuss security. They wanted to know if Leonard thought more attacks were coming. He was honest with them. "Yes," he said. "I think they are. The Kraith were a test. Next time it will be worse." Some people suggested that Leonard should leave, take the dragons somewhere else to draw the danger away. But the colony governor, a stern woman named Claire Martinez, shut that down immediately. "Leonard Hayes is one of us," she declared. "Those dragons saved our children, saved all of us. We do not abandon family. If trouble comes, we face it together." The vote was unanimous. Verdant Prime would stand with Leonard, Ruby, and Midnight. They began making preparations, modest as they were. Better shelters, emergency supplies, communication protocols. It was not much, but it was something. Leonard found himself thinking about Helen's words often. An honor, she had called it. The bond with Ruby and Midnight. He supposed it was, in a way, but it was also terrifying. The thought of losing them, of failing to protect them, kept him awake at night. One night, unable to sleep, he went outside and found both dragons awake, watching the stars. He sat between them and they pressed close, offering comfort without words. "We are afraid too," Midnight's emotions seemed to say through their bond. "But we are together. That is what matters." Ruby made a sound like distant thunder, adding her agreement. They had faced the ice and survived. They had faced the Kraith and won. Whatever came next, they would face it the same way. Together. Leonard felt tears on his cheeks and did not bother to wipe them away. He had saved them once, all those years ago on a frozen planet, but they had saved him too, in ways he was only beginning to understand. They had given him purpose, family, a reason to keep going when the universe felt too big and too cold. The night was quiet around them, peaceful despite the threats lurking in the shadows of the galaxy. Leonard knew this peace would not last. Corvin had been right. The Kraith were only the beginning. But for now he had this moment. This peace, this family, and he would fight with everything he had to protect it. Above them the stars shone cold and distant. But here, on this small colony world, three unlikely companions sat together in the darkness, drawing strength from each other, preparing for whatever storm was coming. The galaxy was watching, the galaxy was waiting, and soon the galaxy would learn what happened when you threatened a mechanic and his dragons. The attack came without warning, as all truly effective attacks do. It was not the Kraith this time. They had learned their lesson and were content to give Verdant Prime a wide space. Instead, it was the Collective, a group of corporate interests and mercenary fleets that operated in the gray areas between legitimate government and outright piracy. They had decided that two Draconis dragons represented a resource too valuable to ignore, and Leonard Hayes was simply the obstacle between them and an unimaginable fortune. The Collective sent 40 ships. Not exploration vessels or diplomatic ships, but pure military hardware. Dreadnoughts with laser batteries that could crack planets, fighter wings designed for atmospheric control, dropships carrying mechanized assault units equipped with neural suppressors specifically engineered to shut down high-intelligence alien targets. They had done their research. They knew about the Kraith defeat. They had adjusted their tactics accordingly, and they were confident, in the way that those with overwhelming force always are, that sheer numbers would win. Leonard was repairing a harvester robot when the first explosions lit up the horizon. His hands, steady from years of precision work, did not shake as he set down his tools and activated the colony-wide emergency broadcast. "This is Leonard Hayes. We are under attack. Get to the shelters. Stay underground. Do not try to fight. This is not your battle." Ruby and Midnight were already airborne before he finished speaking, their forms outlined against the burning sky. Leonard felt their determination through the bond, but also something else. Fear. Not for themselves, but for him. For the colonists. For the home they had built together. The collective's commander, a human mercenary named Victor Kane, watched the initial battle from the bridge of his flagship. His tactical display showed 2 targets separating to engage his fleet from multiple directions. Predictable, his neural suppressor teams were already in position, hidden among the fighter wings, waiting for the dragons to close distance. What Kane did not account for was that Ruby and Midnight had spent 12 years learning from each other, developing tactics that no single dragon could manage alone. They were not just twins. They were a binary system, each one's strengths covering the other's weaknesses, their bond allowing split-second coordination that no amount of technology could match. Ruby hit the first wave of fighters with a technique that humans would later call the solar flare. She channeled the energy from her scales into a blinding burst of light and heat, overloading sensors and cooking unshielded electronics. Half the fighter wing dropped like stones before they even found their targets. Midnight passed through the lead dreadnought, but instead of attacking systems, she released a pulse of energy that disrupted the neural suppressors before they could be activated. The collective's secret weapon became worthless scrap metal in milliseconds. Kane realized far too late that he was not fighting animals or even particularly clever weapons. He was fighting 2 ancient beings who had been perfecting the art of combat when humanity was still learning to make fire. And they were furious. The battle lasted 4 hours. The collective threw everything they had at the dragons. Laser strikes that could melt mountains, kinetic weapons moving at huge fractions of light speed, biological weapons, chemical weapons, weapons banned by 12 different galactic agreements. Ruby and Midnight fought with a grace and fury that rewrote tactical books. They split apart and came back together. They faked attacks and countered. They turned the collective's own weapons against them, using precision strikes to trigger chain reactions that destroyed multiple ships with single actions. But they were not invincible. They were mortal, and the sheer amount of fire began to take its toll. Ruby took a direct hit from a laser battery, the beam burning through her wing and sending her into a spiral. Midnight caught her sister before she could hit the ground, but the moment of distraction cost her. A kinetic projectile clipped her side, cracking scales and drawing blood that glowed like starlight. Leonard watched from his workshop, his hands clenched into fists. He could feel their pain through the bond, but also their unwavering determination. They would not give up. They would fight until they could not fly. And if they fell, they would fall defending the home that had given them peace. But Leonard Hayes had not spent 15 years as the best mechanic in 3 sectors by accepting when things were broken. If his family was going to fight, then he would fight too, just in his own way. He ran to his workshop's storage area and dragged out a device he had been building for months. It was supposed to be a long-range communication booster, something to help colonists stay in touch with the outer settlements. But with a few changes, it could become something else entirely. Leonard worked with the speed and precision of someone who had spent a lifetime making broken things work. He rerouted power lines, adjusted frequency settings, and jury-rigged a power source that would probably explode if he looked at it wrong. But if it worked, if his calculations were right, it would send a signal that could be heard across half the sector, a call for help. Not to governments or councils or official channels, but to the people who knew Leonard Hayes, the mechanics, the engineers, the salvage crews, the independent traders, the people who fixed things when they broke, who helped strangers because it was the right thing to do, the people who understood that sometimes the most important repair job was holding the line until help arrived. Leonard activated the beacon and sent his message into the void. Then he grabbed the biggest wrench in his workshop and headed outside. If Ruby and Midnight were going to fight, he would stand with them, even if all he could do was fix what broke and hope it was enough. Above him, the sky burned with fire and destruction. Another collective ship exploded, torn apart by Ruby's claws. Midnight phased through a fighter squadron, leaving disabled craft tumbling through the air. But there were so many. Too many. Leonard felt Ruby's exhaustion through the bond, felt Midnight's pain as another weapon found its mark. They were winning, but slowly. And slow victories in battles like this meant eventual defeat. Then, impossibly, a new ship appeared on the horizon. Not a collective vessel. This one was old, patched together from a dozen different models, the kind of ship only a skilled mechanic could keep running. The steady hand. Gregory Morris's cargo hauler, Leonard's beacon, had worked. His message had gotten through. And Gregory, the gruff engineer who never forgot a favor, had come. But Gregory was not alone. Behind the steady hand came another ship. Then another. Then a dozen more. Cargo haulers, salvage vessels, mining ships, even a few pirate craft. All of them bearing down on the collective fleet with improvised weapons and jury-rigged shields. Leonard heard Gregory's voice crackle over the open comm channel. "Sorry we are late, Leonard. Traffic was murder. Now where do you want these collective thugs?" The makeshift fleet tore into the collective's flanks with reckless abandon. They did not have military-grade weapons or armor. But they had ingenuity. They had experience. And most importantly, they were angry. A salvage vessel used its industrial cutter to slice through a dreadnought's engine section. A mining ship deployed magnetic nets that tangled fighter wings. Gregory's steady hand rammed a dropship at full speed, both vessels exploding in a ball of fire that lit up the sky. Leonard's heart stopped. Gregory. But then he heard the gruff voice again, this time from a different ship. "Takes more than that to kill me, Hayes. Now get those dragons to the rally point. We have got a plan." Ruby and Midnight, given a moment to breathe by the sudden arrival of reinforcements, descended to Leonard's position. They were hurt, bleeding, exhausted, but their eyes still burned with determination. Leonard ran his hands over their wounds, assessing damage with a mechanic's eye. Not good, but not fatal. They could still fight. They would have to. Leonard, Ruby transmitted through their bond, showing him images. The makeshift fleet had been building something while they fought. Something big. Leonard looked up and saw it. Floating in space among the wreckage was a massive device, cobbled together from destroyed collective ships and parts from the rescue fleet. It looked like chaos, but Leonard's trained eye saw the pattern. An electromagnetic pulse weapon, big enough to fry every ship in range, but incomplete. It needed a power source it did not have, and shielding that did not exist, unless you had two dragons who could channel energy on a scale that made nuclear reactors look like candles. Leonard understood instantly. It was brilliant. It was also suicide. The amount of power needed would drain Ruby and Midnight completely. They might not survive. He opened his mouth to say no, to find another way. But Ruby pressed her head against his chest, and Midnight wrapped her tail around his waist. They knew the risks. They accepted them, because this was their home too. These were their people, and some things were worth dying for. Leonard felt tears on his face but nodded. All right. But we do this together. Take me with you. If this is the end, we face it as family." Midnight lowered herself, and Leonard climbed onto her back for the first time in 12 years. His mechanic's hands gripped her scales warm and solid beneath him. Ruby positioned herself beside them, and Leonard felt both dragons' determination mirror his own. Together, the three of them rose into the burning sky, heading toward the jury-rigged weapon and whatever fate awaited them there. They came from everywhere. Leonard's beacon had reached farther than he thought possible, carried by the kind of jury-rigged boost that only worked when a mechanic was absolutely desperate and absolutely skilled. The signal bounced through communication relays, got picked up by passing freighters, was sent again by friendly stations, and spread across the sector like wildfire. More ships kept arriving. Independent traders, survey ships, mining vessels, even a few pirate crews who figured that anyone attacking Leonard Hayes was probably worse than they were. None of them had military-grade hardware. None of them were trained soldiers. But every single one of them knew how to make things work when they should not. And that made them dangerous in ways the collective had not expected. Victor Kane watched, his tactical display fill with new contacts, and felt something he had not experienced in years: uncertainty. His fleet still had more ships. His vessels still had better armor, better weapons, better everything. But the new arrivals were not fighting like a regular force. They were fighting like mechanics. They targeted specific systems. They used the wreckage of destroyed collective ships as temporary shields. They coordinated in a chaotic way that made no tactical sense but somehow worked. And worst of all, they were buying time for the dragons to recover. Leonard flew on Midnight's back toward the massive EMP weapon floating in the debris field. Ruby flew beside them, her wing torn but still functional. Both dragons were exhausted, bleeding, pushed to their limits. But they were not done yet. Gregory's voice came through Leonard's communicator. "Leonard, we are holding them off, but they are adapting. We need that weapon active now, or we are all going to die up here." Leonard studied the device as they approached. It was beautiful in its ugliness, a patchwork of salvaged parts and desperate engineering. He could see the power conduits, the focusing arrays, the incomplete shielding. His mind automatically began calculating what was needed. Ruby and Midnight would need to channel their energy into the main power cores simultaneously. The device would amplify it, focus it, and release it as a pulse that would disable every unshielded system within 10,000 kilometers. The makeshift fleet, warned in advance, had pulled back and activated what emergency shielding they could manage. The collective fleet, confident in their superiority, had no such protection, but the power requirements were massive. Ruby and Midnight would have to give everything they had. It might kill them. Probably would kill them. Leonard felt that knowledge settle in his chest like a stone. "No," he said out loud. "There has to be another way. I am not losing you. Not like this." Ruby turned her great head to look at him, and through their bond he felt her love. Her gratitude for 12 years of peace and family, her acceptance of what had to be done. Midnight's emotions joined Ruby's, a harmony of determination and affection. "We are not dying," Midnight seemed to say through their connection. "We are living. This is what living means, protecting those we love." Leonard's hands shook as he worked, making last-minute adjustments to the weapon's focusing array. He rerouted power flows, balanced the energy distribution, did everything he could to reduce the strain on the dragons. It was not enough. It would never be enough, but it was all he had. Victor Kane saw what was happening and tried to order an emergency jump to hyperspace, but Gregory Morris had anticipated that, had positioned his ship to block the flagship's exit path. It was a suicide move. It was also absolutely typical of the kind of people who answered Leonard's call. "All ships pull back," Leonard's voice rang across the communication channels. "Ruby, Midnight on my mark, give it everything. Show these corporate thugs what happens when you threaten mechanics and their dragons." The makeshift fleet scattered like leaves in a storm. Ruby and Midnight flew in perfect coordination, positioning themselves on either side of the jury-rigged EMP weapon. Leonard felt their power building through the bond, felt the energy coursing through their bodies, ancient and terrible and absolutely under their control. He thought of the frozen planet where he found them. He thought of 12 years of peace. He thought of Sophie's smile when Ruby saved her from the forest. He thought of every moment, every memory, every reason why this family was worth fighting for. Now, Ruby and Midnight released their energy in perfect unity, channeling power that had slept in their scales for 12 peaceful years. The EMP weapon activated with a pulse that lit up every sensor in 3 star systems. Every collective ship within range went dark at once. Life support, weapons, engines, everything. 40 warships became 40 coffins drifting in the void. But Ruby and Midnight did not fall. The weapon, enhanced by Leonard's last-minute modifications, had drawn less power than expected. The dragons were exhausted, their scales dim, their bodies shaking, but they were alive. Leonard felt relief crash over him like a wave. He laughed, or maybe cried, or maybe both. They had done it. Against impossible odds, with nothing but ingenuity and courage and love, they had won. The makeshift fleet moved in quickly, boarding the disabled ships and securing the crews before life support could fail completely. They were mechanics. They did not kill when they could fix. Even the enemy deserved that much. Leonard guided Midnight back to the surface, Ruby flying weakly beside them. They landed in front of his workshop as the sun rose over Verdant Prime, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. The dragons collapsed immediately, their energy completely spent. Leonard worked through the day and night, tending their wounds with the same care he had shown 12 years ago on a frozen planet. He cleaned injuries, set broken bones, used medical supplies meant for humans because they were all he had. The dragons bore it without complaint, their eyes fixed on him with trust. The colonists emerged from their shelters as the danger passed, looking up at a sky finally clear of threat. Children ran to see the dragons, bringing flowers and drawings. Adults brought food and supplies. The entire community came together to help, to show gratitude, to celebrate survival. Gregory Morris survived, pulled from the wreckage of his ship by the rescue teams. He showed up at Leonard's workshop 3 days later, limping but grinning. "That was the stupidest, most beautiful thing I have ever been part of," he declared. "When do we do it again?" "Never, if I have anything to say about it," Leonard replied. But he was smiling. Word of the Battle of Verdant Prime spread across the galaxy faster than any faster-than-light drive. The story of Leonard Hayes, the mechanic who saved frozen dragons and earned their eternal loyalty. The story of Ruby and Midnight, ancient beings who found family in an unlikely place. The story of ordinary people who answered a call for help and changed the course of a battle through creativity and courage. The Galactic Council officially recognized Verdant Prime as a protected world. The collective was dissolved, its property taken, and its leadership tried for war crimes, and Leonard Hayes became a legend, though he always insisted he was just a mechanic who got lucky. But the galaxy knew better. They had seen what humanity could do when pushed. They had seen what loyalty looked like when it crossed species lines. They had seen dragons return to the sky, and they had seen the name of the human who made it possible. Years later, when children across 100 worlds told stories of heroes and monsters, of battles won against impossible odds, they always included one particular tale. The story of the human mechanic who saved the frozen dragon twins. The story of how, years later, when the sky burned and all seemed lost, those same dragons remembered his kindness. Helen came to visit once more, appearing at Leonard's door with her walking stick and knowing smile. "You did well," she said simply. "The Draconis have returned, and they returned because of you. That is a gift beyond measure." Leonard, older now and more tired, sat with her on his porch while Ruby and Midnight dozed in the afternoon sun. "I did not do anything special," he said. "I just did not want them to die alone." Helen patted his hand gently. "That is what makes it special. You saw beings in need and you helped. No other reason, no expectation of reward, just simple kindness. The galaxy needs more of that." She left again, and Leonard went back to his workshop. There were always things to fix, problems to solve, machines that needed attention. It was simple work, honest work, and it made him happy. Ruby and Midnight recovered fully over the following months. They never regained their former size, the battle having taken a permanent toll, but they did not seem to mind. They still flew, still hunted, still sat with Leonard under the stars. They were home. They were safe. They were loved. Sophie, now a young woman studying engineering at the colony's technical school, came to visit often. She wanted to be a mechanic like Leonard, she said. Wanted to fix things and help people. Leonard taught her what he could, pleased to pass on his knowledge to someone who understood the value of simple kindness. One evening, as the three of them sat together watching the sunset, Leonard thought about everything that had happened. From a frozen cave to a peaceful colony, from loneliness to family, from a simple act of kindness to a legend that would outlive them all. Was it worth it? All the danger, all the fear, all the close calls with death? He looked at Ruby, her scales catching the fading light. He looked at Midnight, her eyes reflecting the first stars of evening. He felt their contentment,